Hi, my name's Andy, welcome to Really Random Reads, and today I'm going to be doing the Snob-o-Meter Tag. Hope I got that out right. And I was tagged by Pat at Book Chat with Pat. Thank you, Pat. So, question one is, what is your definition of book snobbery? And this is one of those questions, when you watch somebody else's video on this, you think in your head, that's what I think it is. And then when you come to do the video, it's like, oh. So I think book snobbery is if you think, or someone thinks, there is a pinnacle of highbrow, you'll probably use the word literature here instead of books, literature, and that people who read other books to that are engaged in a lesser activity, a lesser pursuit, and getting less from it. Yeah, that's a very long-winded definition, but I'm going to go with that. You know what I mean. Oh, do you know what though? I would say I do believe in inverse snobbery. So for example, I can think of a literary agent who was extremely against comparison titles that were modern classics. Now some of that, it's very pragmatic, it's to do with sales, and you can't go out there and say like, hey, I'm the new James Joyce or whatever. But also I sense with that type of position undertones of, maybe I'm wrong about this, but undertones of those stuffy old books don't sell, we don't want to hear about them. So I do think inverse snobbery exists as well, even if I haven't given the best example of it. Outside of reading, I've experienced this in life where I really like to go to boxing and watch boxing shows. I also really like to go to the opera, and I've known people be like, oh, what are you going to the opera for? And I've known people like, what are you going to the boxing for? I've kind of seen it on both ways. Is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading? There is no genre, I feel fairly confident in saying, that I would never consider reading. Two genres that I massively struggle with and don't feel interest in. Well, it might be wrong, but it's true, so I'm just saying it. Natural history. I just cannot get engaged with natural history books. Now, if you ask me when was the last time I tried, I'm going to struggle to answer that. So maybe that tells me something about my own sort of blinkers. The other one is travel writing. Now, travel writing, I have tried a few times with, and there are two reasons that I struggle with this. Maybe it's just the books that I've read. The first reason is they tend to be, just in terms of the ones I've read, and then, in terms of their structure, rather than a story. So this happened, because of this thing, this next thing happened. Because of that, this next thing happened, with tension rising, and I'm invested, I'm engaged as a reader. It tends to be and then. The other reason I struggle with it is, and it's kind of related, the level of self-interest in the books I've read. And I feel, I don't want to put the title, because particularly the one I'm thinking of, it's a fairly well-known book, but it's not massive. So it's not impossible, perhaps, that person might see this video. I don't want to sort of like kick them. But the level of self-interest in the travel books that I have read when I just weren't that interested in what I was being told, it was interesting to them, but not to me. That kind of puts me off. Unexpected assault on travel books. Does erotica count as literature? I would say erotica, like any genre of writing, can count as literature. Tempted to, it begs the question, what is literature? And I just ain't got the energy for that today. We'll talk about that another time maybe. And I'm not even sure I know. But can erotica count as literature? Let's call it that. Yes, I believe it can. When? So I don't think it can do that if it is, without getting too graphic, purely functional, let's say. I think it needs to have something, people are probably going to wince if I use that word transcend, aren't they? But it needs to have something about it that runs deeper than just a functional story to get somebody off. So, weirdly, I begin to think a bit now of another genre, detective fiction. And there is a quote, I'm going to get creative with my editing while I find this quote. I'm back again, I found it. So it's a quote by W.H. Auden, who was a poet, and he was writing about detective fiction in a really good novel, a really good non-fiction piece of writing called The Guilty Vicarage. It's an essay about detective fiction. And he wrote, "For me, as for many others, the reading of detective stories is an addiction like tobacco or alcohol." And he knew what he was talking about with those. The excitement of a thriller lasts only as long as the book is not finished. Once I know who did it, I can never enjoy reading it again. So I think in some types of genre of fiction, probably the majority of books are kind of like that. But then you get the other ones that hit bigger and run deeper. So if you're thinking around like detective fiction, probably The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, that would be an example of that. If you're thinking spy fiction, I would argue The Innocent by Ian McEwan would be an example of that. In terms of erotica, I haven't read, I'm just putting that down, I haven't read loads of erotic novels. I've read some Marquis de Sade, but I don't really see that as erotica. I see that as, what do I see that as? I see that as transgressive writing and violence, really, more than sex. What I have read though, I've read a fair old bit, and I'm gonna say her name wrong even though I'm trying really hard to learn French, of Anais Nin. And I have to say, I find, so there's a famous sort of erotic short story collection of hers, The Delta of Venus. I find her diaries and non-fiction writing, here's a copy of a volume of her diaries called Henry and June, about a relationship with Henry Miller and Henry's partner June. I find that in many ways more engaging and more interesting than her writing her erotic fiction. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say I haven't read erotica widely enough to be able to give you examples where I think it has constituted literature. The fact that this book, though, is in a modern Penguin classic, you know, maybe you could make that argument. But I do think all genres of writing, including erotica, can constitute literature. And there you go. Is it better to read classic books rather than popular bestsellers? No, would be my short answer to that. Why, you ask? Well, I think it's a dodgy question, really, because a lot of these books that are regarded as classics today, particularly modern classics, they were the popular bestsellers of their time. It's just history that's made them that way. The same as music, things like opera that I mentioned already. It's only now, sort of in 2025 or whenever, that these things are sort of perceived as, perhaps by some, perceived as elitist or, I can't remember the word when it's to do with like elitist knowledge, but that word. Yeah, so Charles Dickens of his day was a popular novelist, as was Anthony Trollope. Now they have a Penguin Modern Classics cover on them, and they're probably by many people, including me, regarded as literature, whatever that means. But they were popular novels of their day. So for me, yeah, it's a misnomer, really, the question. I like this track though. Have you ever bragged about a classic in order to sound smart? Not that I remember, but like Pat said, I think I probably have at some point. And if I say no, I feel that's probably just almost like willful blindness. I'm pretty sure if I could watch a film back of my life, there would be some point in that where I'm like, oh yeah, he's gone and done that. But no, I can't remember having done so, but I'm sure at some point when I was younger and maybe thought a bit differently, perhaps I did. I would say as well, most of the people that I have been in contact with and around throughout my life, reading hasn't tended to be seen as a good thing. It wouldn't be something that you would brag about. So, yeah. And that's very wrong, of course, but there you go. Do audiobooks count as reading? What about comic books or graphic novels? Audiobooks, I've done a whole video on that. Go and have a look if you're interested. I'll pop the link up. What about comic books or graphic novels? Okay, so if I'm in a gallery, looking at some pictures. I wouldn't say I'm reading the pictures. So Hogarth, if people know him, he was an English artist painting in the 1700s. He's one of my favourite artists because his pictures tell stories, and they often come in a series. So there'll be like the Harlot's Progress, for example, the Rake's Progress. These pictures have stories within the pictures, stories within stories, as well as the larger series of pictures. But I don't say I've gone to the John Sloane Museum and read Hogarth. I've studied the pictures. Now, comic or graphic novel. I'm not going to say I studied, this afternoon I studied a graphic novel, or I looked through a graphic novel. I would say I read a graphic novel, but I think that is the parts of the graphic novel where I'm engaging with the drawings. I don't think that's reading, but I also don't think it's a lesser thing than reading. And the captions, of course, I'm reading those. Can graphic novels count as reading? Yes is my short answer, but they have an additional component to them as well. And snobbery. So recently I got really into this polar gothic thing. I read The Terror and seen the brilliant TV series. I'd read another novel, Polar Gothic, the name has escaped me. I'm going to put it on the screen, really good. And it's not polar, but I might nearly finish Moby Dick and, you know, kind of, sort of ish in that territory. And I wanted to read, I was asking ChatGPT for good sort of Polar Gothic recommendations. And it told me 30 Days of Night, which I remembered as being a not so great Hollywood film from when I was a kid. But it was based on a graphic novel, so I bought that collection of graphic novels, that series. I think it's like 3. I thought they were really good. And yeah, but my partner saw me reading them and she said that looks like, showed the cover of one of them, she said that looks like the biggest load of trash I've ever seen. And you could argue, I think, that would be an example of snobbery. Now, of course, if you're, say, like Ollie at Criminoli, to him, if somebody had said that to him, he would probably think, great, that's exactly what I really enjoy. I'm not ashamed that something's trash. I enjoy trash, that's what I'm looking for. Great, you know, get me more of it. But that wasn't the way she meant it. So that comes to mind for an answer to this question. Have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book with little substance, for example, a self-help book or celebrity memoir? Yes, I have. Again, when I was younger, this time I would have been mid-teens, I think, maybe a bit younger than that actually. And my friend, his sister was a bit older, and he was, to be honest, he was kind of like bragging to me about how many books she read. And then when I saw what the books were, so say she's like knocking off 4 or 5 books in an afternoon, I was thinking, blimmin' heck. They were sort of, I don't know my genres well enough, but the type of romance novels, kind of, I think, in the Mills and Boon line, but again, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but the sort of thing that even me as a slow reader would be able to read, reading speed-wise. I could read probably a few of those in an afternoon. And I thought, and I didn't say anything at the time, but I had kind of like a snobby view of it, and that was wrong. Doesn't really matter. You know, if you enjoy reading, doesn't really matter what it is. Have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? I just gave you that graphic novel example, so I'm going to go with that. Would you ever be friends with a snob? Maybe you already are. I think I would find that really difficult, you know. There is somebody in my life, sounds cryptic, doesn't it? But there is somebody in my life that I think probably falls into that category. And I do find that element of my interactions with them, or I do find because of that, my interactions with them, oftentimes quite challenging. So I think I would struggle, is the answer. Are people, it's not my partner by the way, are people you don't read less sophisticated, are people who don't read, ironically I can't read this question, less sophisticated than people who do? No, I don't think so. So what is reading? Reading, in my terms, is One of the things it is a device for empathy. It's a way for tapping into what's going on with other people, other experiences, and broadening your horizons. And it's great for that, I think. It's also good for learning, you know, practical things about stuff you don't know. But there are other ways to achieve those aims. I have known people who can't read or write, who are, what's the exact wording of the question? Sorry. What is the wording of the question, Andy? Less sophisticated. I have known people who cannot read who are sophisticated. It's about how you are getting that stuff in other ways, I guess. So travel might be an example of it. If you are extremely, you know, what does it mean to be well-travelled? If I say I'm well-travelled on here, you know, it isn't, God knows how many places you've been to, but I'm relatively well-travelled, I suppose, modestly well-travelled. Many people are much more incredibly well-travelled than me, who have had broader experiences, in their lives, and have reflected upon those experiences and haven't needed to read in order to do that. And I say that as somebody who loves to read. So no, I don't think you have to read in order to be sophisticated. I feel like I could talk for longer about that. I feel like pushing a button in me. Something about that question annoys me. But I think I've given you a flavour of my response. And where I say some of these questions annoy me, that isn't a criticism of a tag. I like a tag that does that to me, okay? So it's good. Whoever came up with this, I'm going to put their name in the description as well. Tag some people. Oh, sorry. Fundamental question. Measure yourself. Based on your answers to the previous 10 questions, would you qualify yourself as a book snob? I would say no, but probably in earlier life, or yes, and I just have absolutely no insight into it, which would be terrible, wouldn't it? Tag some people. I'm going to put it in the description because I haven't done my homework properly this time. But if you've seen this, consider yourself tagged as well. Thanks, folks. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more of this type of stuff, give it a subscribe. Bye.